It was a Saturday morning, the sun was shining bright, and I, Brody, was enjoying a rare moment of peace after a hectic week at work. As the special agent for the FBI, my life can get pretty chaotic. Most of my days are filled with high-stakes investigations where I'm constantly on the move. So, when I get a moment to breathe, I savor it. Little did I know that this particular Saturday would take a turn I never expected. I was enjoying my coffee on the porch when I noticed a package sitting on my doorstep. It had been delivered earlier that morning. I had been waiting for this package for weeks, a high-tech gadget I planned on using as a part of my next operation. The moment I spotted it, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. However, as I walked towards it, I noticed something unusual, a figure hovering nearby. I squinted, trying to make out who it was, and my heart sank. It was Betty, the notorious HOA lady from across the street. Betty had made it her life's mission to make everyone else's life miserable, particularly if they didn't adhere strictly to her perceived standards of conduct. In recent months, I'd already had my fair share of issues with her. She had commented on everything from my lawn care to the cars I parked in my driveway. As I reached for my package, I noticed the glimmer of something metallic in her hand. My instincts kicked in. Betty was not just here for casual chit-chat. The narrative in my mind began to form. I had caught the HOA queen trying to steal my package. "Betty, what are you doing?" I called out, my voice firm but calm. She whipped around, clutching my package tightly. Her expression quickly morphed from shock to indignation, as if I had interrupted her grand scheme. "I was just looking to see if you were home," she exclaimed, tossing her hair back. "You know, to make sure this was delivered to the right person." I couldn't help but roll my eyes. "You mean to make sure you could get your hands on my package?" I countered. At that moment, the tone in the air shifted, and I felt that familiar prickle of anxiety one gets in the presence of someone who feels entitled to everything. "I'm not the one with the criminal record," she shot back, her voice dripping with condescension. The blatant racism in her words was a punch to the gut. I knew how to handle this woman. "You seem to have a habit of judging people based on things you don't understand," I said, trying to maintain my composure. "You have no idea what I do for a living, Betty." And then, she took it a step further. "You're just a thug," she sneered, her disdain palpable. "I'm calling the police." Her words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. The realization hit me that she wasn't just calling the cops, she was weaponizing her privilege against me. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. How could someone be so willfully ignorant? "Go ahead, Betty. Call the police." "I'll be right here," I said, standing my ground. I wasn't about to let her intimidate me into submission. She fumbled with her phone, clearly flustered. "You think you can get away with this? Just wait until they get here. They won't take your side," she spat, tapping anxiously on her screen. As I watched her speak to the dispatcher, my mind raced. I felt like I was caught in a twisted comedy, albeit one that held dire consequences. I realized, however, that I had something to lose: my career, my reputation, everything I worked so hard for. Breathing deeply, I reached into my pocket and pulled out my badge, just to show her I wasn't just some random guy on the street. "Betty, I'm a special agent with the FBI," I said, raising the badge slightly for emphasis. "This is a federal matter. You really want to escalate this?" But there was no changing her mind. She continued to blabber on to the operator while glaring at me with her self-righteous indignation. It felt like an eternity before the police arrived, but in reality, it was only about 15 minutes. During that time, Betty had flung herself into her familiar role as the wronged citizen, recounting her embellished version of events. "Officers! This man was trying to steal my package," she exclaimed, pointing at me dramatically as they approached. The officers, two burly guys in uniforms, turned their attention towards me, and I could feel the judgment radiating from them. I took a deep breath and presented my badge. "I'm an FBI special agent, and she's misconstruing the situation. That's my package, and she was attempting to take it." The younger officer looked at my badge, then back to Betty, clearly unsure of how to proceed. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" Betty wasted no time, her voice dripping with theatric. "I was simply trying to ensure that this package wasn't stolen when he came out and acted threatening," she exclaimed. I interjected, pointing to my package. "Any reasonable person could see that she was attempting to steal it. I just caught her in the act." The two officers exchanged glances, clearly trying to gauge the situation. I knew it wasn't the first time they'd seen a scenario like this, and I could feel the tension building. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime of back and forth, the officers stripped the situation down to its bare essentials. "Let's take a step back," the older officer said, calming the atmosphere. "This is a civil matter concerning property. Do either of you have proof of ownership?" Feeling a wave of relief hit me, I reached for my phone and pulled up the order confirmation. "Here's my proof," I said, showing them the receipt, my name clearly printed on it. The younger officer glanced at it, then at Betty, who was still trying to shift the narrative. "Ma'am, it looks like this package does belong to him," he stated, but not without hesitation. "We advise you to refrain from making unfounded accusations in the future." Betty's face turned a deep shade of red. "This is ridiculous," she shouted. "You can't let him just get away with this." But the officers were done with her antics. They politely escorted her off my property, cautioning her that her attempts to deceive could backfire. As the officers turned to me, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "Sorry for the trouble," one of them said with an understanding nod. "Some people think they can get away with anything." I nodded back, grateful for their professionalism. "Thanks, officers. Just another day in this neighborhood." Once they departed, I turned back to my porch, feeling relieved but still shaken. The situation had ended benignly, but it was a stark reminder of the prejudice and stereotypes that lingered in our society. Betty had tried to make me a victim of her delusion. Over the next few weeks, news about my confrontation with Betty spread throughout the neighborhood. The intensity of the situation had caused ripples in the HOA community. Betty's entitlement was called out from multiple corners, and people began to question her motives. Meanwhile, my FBI colleagues caught wind of the incident. Despite the serious nature of my job, they couldn't resist teasing me about the HOA showdown. I couldn't help but laugh along, realizing how ridiculous the whole thing had turned out. One Friday evening, I sat outside listening to music, when I saw Betty's husband talking to the neighbors. It seemed he was trying to defend her actions, but the conversations did not go well for him. Over the next few days, a series of complaints filed with the HOA regarding absurd violations began coming in. People felt courageous, emboldened to stand against Betty's unreasonable regulations regarding dog leashes, lawn ornaments, and holiday decorations. A few weeks later, I saw an official notice in my mailbox announcing a community meeting. The agenda was clearly laid out. Betty was getting called out for her behavior and lack of transparency. I couldn't help but chuckle, feeling the balance of justice beginning to tip. At the meeting, an uproar of voices filled the room. People expressed their frustrations regarding her past behaviors. I stayed in the back, observing as the tide turned against her. When the vote was called to oust her from her HOA position, the outcome felt almost surreal. With more than 2/3 of the attendees voting against her, she was removed in a matter of minutes. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of vindication, not only for myself, but for those who had also suffered from her racism and entitlement. Betty's reign was finally over, and I realized that sometimes karma hits exactly where it needs to. Months passed, and life returned to a nice sense of normality. I had my package, my job, and a renewed sense of community pride. I didn't avoid Betty. Instead, I chose to live my life the way I always had, openly and without fear of her baseless opinions. In turn, I also noticed a change in the neighborhood. More people began to speak up against the toxicity of the HOA culture, which Betty had so epitomized, and the community flourished. We organized events, got to know one another, and shaped the kind of neighborhood we all wanted to live in. My confrontation with Betty taught me that while racism and entitlement might rear their ugly heads from time to time, confronting such behavior with dignity and facts can lead to positive change. We all have the power to reshape our communities and ensure that no one feels small or powerless. So, to anyone reading this, stand up and speak out against injustice, no matter how minor it may seem. You never know how many lives your bravery can change. And as for Betty? Well, let's just say that I'm pretty sure she'll think twice before trying to steal something again, especially not from a black man with an FBI badge.